a trend towards loneliness,
That's
and
right.
feeling like,
That's right.
and it's something that I experience, and I have a ton of friends, and I like know a lot of people. If I go to any place that's health oriented or fitness oriented, there's a good chance, 18% of the room be like, hey, like we know each other. But that level of depth of connection and really feeling like you actually have like a firm net to fall back on, as opposed to these kind of like cursory, superficial, lots of names, and have lots of Instagram handles, but like who can you actually lean on? That's something that feels somewhat divorced in the modern culture. And I feel like we're reaching out for a lot of seemingly like panacea solutions, but the trends aren't changing. And so I wonder, what do you have any thoughts on that, like correlation of loneliness and the sensation of maybe like disconnection to meaningful community, how that could perhaps tie back into physiological well-being?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. And I think it's a giant problem and probably the root cause of a lot of the depression and mental health challenges we're having, writ large as a country and community, in our communities and even with kids. Um, when we sort of bring it back to what we care about and how we try to stave off that loneliness, because even though we're married and we have kids, I understand what you mean. I mean, I think sometimes it's hard to find people to relate to and, understand what each other's lives are like and really actually talk on a deep level. And I will say, I think
Feel
men,
understood.
yeah, I feel understood and seen. And I think
Yeah.
men in particular, not to make a gross generalization, but I think from what I observe anyway, do struggle even more with that because they don't naturally form community and community groups as easily as women do.
Mhm.
That's one of the things we actually had at the forefront of our mind. And one of the reasons why, like in our walking chapter in our book, we encourage people to go walk with people.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we like walking so much and we're obsessed with walking is that it's the perfect thing to go do with other people. And it has this great dual benefit of connection and movement, which, are obviously two of the most important things to us. And so I think, that's how I've tried to create community in my own life is through movement practices. Like I have a group of women that I work out with 3 times a week, and it's not a big group. It's not a public group. It's not a class. And we do work out, but we also talk about our lives and what's going on with our kids and, how we're injured and struggled. And we also have a mountain bike club. And
Failed
so
state.
we've tried to create these, these communities in little ways. And because we love to move, we've created community around movement. And I don't know that does everything to solve the loneliness problem, but certainly that's how we've tried to approach it in our own lives.
Yeah, there's a term that I recently learned called male normative alexithymia, and it's alexithymia. From my understanding, the definition of that is a person to not be able to have the ability to uh, speak emotions. So you have all these sensations, like Kelly, you mentioned, like anxiety, or maybe some type of like shutting down, disassociation thing comes up. But being able to actually have the instrumentation and understand how to operate the instrumentation in order to allow that to come out, and then also to be able to be seen in that and heard from another person. I think that the general, be strong, stay hard stoicism that's taught to young boys, and then men as well, and then applauded on Muscle and Fitness and all the different places that we see media. I think it creates a somewhat of like an emotional constipation of sorts, and you see that like the rate of suicide with men is very high. It's higher with women. Women experience more depression, but then they kind of have the tools and the community and the net to be able to like diffuse. It feels. Is it okay if I ask you about that's like your experience with that, Kelly? I know it diverts away from some of the more common topics, and we'll talk about the book, but I just think it's important. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
But before he goes, I just want to add one thing because I do think this is important, and I look forward to his answer. But when you were talking, all I could think about was, Kelly growing up without a dad, and without a role model. And I think, I think Kelly's not alone. I think there's so many men who, and especially it seems like more in our generation, like 80s, 90s kids. Maybe not, it's probably the same, but no dad present, so no role model for him to be sort of a connected and present male.
Mm.
So he's had to invent that on his own.
Mm.
And then
Co-invent with
I
you.
think then the dual thing, for him is exactly what you said, is that the, societal messages are be strong, don't connect with your emotions, don't learn to speak of them.
Yeah.
So I think he has it coming in hot from all those angles.
I haven't been lonely in 23 years. I have a younger sibling that I'm married to who fears being alone and being bored. And so if you feel lonely, just, and I'm being facetious, but also just be in a room full of 3 women who are powerful, rad women all the time, you better be on your game. I'm talking about my daughters. And what I'll say is, my mom's a psychologist. Like, she was a professor of psychology. I sort of had some meta awareness, but ultimately it's about, as you're hinting at, is doing the thing and creating opportunities to relate in the thing. I think if there has to be some kind of major trauma or intention that isn't as sustainable as a feature. Alcoholism, going to an AA meeting, right? Going to a plant medicine retreat or doing something like that. Like, those things could happen for people, but they aren't the day to day. So where in your day to day are you creating opportunities for that, or at least sometimes during the week? One thing that's been really useful for us that we've learned from Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese, was bringing a sauna into our life changed our life.
Yeah.
Because for Juliet and I, oftentimes, we're in this dimly lit sauna. It's uncomfortable, and we're just there. And we're there for 20 or 30 minutes, and there's no distraction except suffering and heating, and then jumping out and jumping in. One of our neighbors, it's very unusual, but a few years ago, Jameson moved into our neighborhood. And I have discovered I have a best friend who lives across the street, who is into training, into backpacking, I drug him to Africa. He is the guy, and he grew up sort of in a mirror inverse of me on the East Coast, where he was just a wild boy. I discovered kayaking and scaring myself. He discovered hooliganism and hoodlumism. And here we are, both sort of as adult men. But, last night we did the hour-long sauna, where we just talked about business and life and kvetched about our type 1 wives, or type A personality wives. And we didn't set out to have that interaction, but we set out to go be in the same place together and have permission for that to happen. And I think that's so much of what's missing, is creating an opportunity through the environment for the magic to happen, for the kismet, for the painterly, for the happening to just spontaneously occur. And, we don't go in there to our sauna and ice bath thinking, we're going to really get into my soul today.
Right.
But all we need to do is be there, start to be uncomfortable a little bit, and then lo and behold, we start chatting. And we chatted for an hour.
Well, and let me just put some emphasis on the point you originally made, Aaron. Here's Kelly, who is a total extrovert and can talk to anyone. And, like you, I'm sure has 1,000,000,001 friends and people he follows. But Kelly and I are turning 50 this year. And Kelly's definitely had friends, but this new friend of his is like definitely his first kind of best friend and person that he can really connect with.
Yeah.
That he's had in our entire marriage. And meanwhile, I have
Who's
like
been
20
close.
that's been super close to Kelly in like a deep way, the way that you're talking about, sort of missing.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I have throughout that time probably had 15 women who I can connect with on that level. And, those relationships of mine have changed over the years, but there's, they've been pretty constant in terms of having like a large quantity of women that I can connect with on a deep and emotional level. And so isn't that interesting, just to sort of punctuate what you said, which is here's Kelly, and really
I feel like I have close male friends, Matt Vincent, Jesse Burdick, et cetera, but who live far away. Like even Tim and the guys I just went to Japan with, right, for a ski, like everyone's very transparent, but it just it happens once a year. And that is insufficient to carry you through the year.
Meet that loneliness need. So I just thought you'd think that was interesting that, he's.
Yeah. I think it's about like feeling resourced, and a lot of the more common concepts around feeling resourced is like do you have enough calories in? Do you have good quality calories in? Did you get enough sleep?
That
I
friendship
don't
is
know.
a verb too. You actually have to,
Yeah.
one of the things,
Fitness.
it is difficult to run a business, have a wife, have children, and then have additional like power at the end of the day when we feel like we're sprinting to be like, oh, let me go nurture some new friendships. That's actually, you have to work your ass off to go find and create those opportunities to have that. And some of it is, it's a slow happening. That turns out there are 3 other guys on the street, a couple other guys on the street who are terrific men who are into these things like biking. We're in our bike club, or, they like to backcountry ski. And it takes a second for those relationships to coalesce, and so that's why I think it's important that what has worked for me is to make sure that I am going to do a thing regularly with other humans that are in the sort of, in like with the kinds of things I like to do, and then let that run for a while. And it takes time to be vulnerable, and it takes time to be, to be open. And then what that happens though, you have to nurture those relationships, and you have to go out and do stuff together and have this experience and take the next step of being vulnerable. What the hell is going on with your life? Yeah. I see a lot of men who potentially are dysregulated. I think that's a good word. Not eating right, not exercising, not sleeping, self-soothing with bourbon, trying to cope. That sets up a really tenuous relationship for feeling good anyway. And then to actually have to go out and be vulnerable, that's never going to happen. You've got to cover the basis so that you have a moment to be able to go out and have the opportunity to, get to know someone.